Joe Schmidt might be on the way out, but Super Rugby Pacific 2025 is back, baby, and it's not the only thing back. Matt Tamua is back. Matt, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, thanks. Refreshed after a long break. Just didn't really fancy the spring tour early morning, so thought would maybe let it go. But no, all is well in Canberra. Excited for rugby, as I'm sure most code heads are.
Totally. Yeah, you needed that pre-season, didn't you, just to kind of get you through it. You're used to that. 15 years of pre-season. You thought, you know what, I won't do the spring tour. I'll sit that one out. But good to have your face back, your analytical brain. I'm sure it was a good Christmas. I know that we exchanged a few messages across, but throughout, and we did around Joe Schmidt as well. Let's just hit that on the head first up. Were you surprised?
No, disappointed, I guess, could easily be mistaken as surprise. I think disappointed because you can clearly see some positives in what he's been implementing, and then it's like just when we feel like we have a little bit of momentum, we get another kick to the guts, which always is the case as a Aussie rugby player or fan. But yeah, no, look, I think you go, well done, and thank you so much for all the work he's done for us. And yeah, I'm sure he's in the background as well, looking for someone. And I guess you could probably agree that having him on that kind of committee, finding a new person would be a good idea.
Oh, totally. He's got a wealth of experience. You just wonder whether or not that person that Rugby Australia is drawing up in the shortlist, but they've already got a bit of an eye on who that person might be and how much of a relationship they might already have with Joe Schmidt. We're going to get to that, and we're going to kick this conversation on in a moment. But coming up on the first pod of 2025, massive predictions. Super Rugby, it starts this weekend, Friday, Valentine's Friday. It's going to be in the Waratahs from a Sydney point of view, an Australian point of view, will kick-start it at Allianz Stadium against the Highlanders, a New Zealand derby across the ditch as well. So that'll be fantastic. So lots to look forward to this on another edition of the Roar Rugby Podcast. Yeah, I think you summarised that pretty well there. Disappointment with Joe moving on, but no real surprise because it had been, and we'd mentioned it on the pod last year. I know when Dan Parks kind of stepped in, really, he made the shoes his own there. He stepped in seamlessly. But we've been hearing for quite a while that he was likely to move on after the Lions. As it turned out, it was after the Rugby Championship. But I think this, for two reasons, it's not a bad thing. One, if they manage to, the Wallabies get a win against the South Africans in South Africa, wow, you leave an unbelievable legacy. But I'll tell you what, the All Blacks will be sniffing the person that managed to get a win against the Box on their own territory. But secondly, he's probably taken a hit from someone else because good luck to the coach that would have been asked to go to South Africa literally the day or two after a Lions series to then face the back-to-back world champions. So whoever the next coach is going to be was always going to be stepping into a hell of a task. And now that it's going to be October 25 is the first test in the post-Joe Schmidt era, you much prefer to come up against Eddie Jones's Japanese than Rassie Erasmus's Box in South Africa. So I think from that perspective, not a bad thing. But I'm curious as to find out who you think might replace him and perhaps even who you think should replace him because it's early on in these stages. But the RA is known for 6 months, that Joe Schmidt, and probably from the moment he accepted the job, that he was likely to move on. So you would think that there would have been a reasonable amount of planning already about drawing up a short list about who might actually replace him.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We were texting about it, and the names that we throw out are kind of automatically Aussies. But I think I said to you, sometimes with players, because you can't pick from overseas, you have to promote someone who might not be ready into a gold jersey. With a coach, we don't have to do that, and so I think my preference would be that someone who is, who's got a proven track record at provincial or test. But I don't think we need to be forcing an Aussie in there if they're, if there's better candidates. I don't know how you feel about that, but it's kind of weird. We watch Ireland on the weekend. They got 3 Kiwis there, and like there's all these kind of come-ins and go-ins. And for me, just like if it can benefit us, let's just stick with that.
Yeah, so the people that are the front runners from an Australian perspective that are already in the system, and we've got to remember that Joe Schmidt was pretty clear when he got announced. I think it was January 19, saying 2024, saying strong preference is that we can develop Australian coaches so that they're in a great position, and once I eventually move on, and whether or not that's sooner or later, that's the preference. Are we there yet? Probably not. Les Kiss has been back at the Reds for 1 year, and yes, there was progression on the field, but from a results perspective, there was probably progression from a regular round perspective. They still got knocked out in the quarters. Dan McKellar struggled at Leicester. He's back. He's not even coached yet again for the Waratahs this year. Stephen Larkin's Brumbies, once again, a semi-finalist, haven't progressed past the semi-finals in Super Rugby since back when you were playing, probably in 2013.
13, yeah.
And I don't think anyone is thinking Simon Cron is the next head coach, but he could play a role in a wider coaching team if a Mike Cron moves on, given his expertise as a forwards coach. So I agree. I don't think that there's a standout candidate in Australia at the moment, although I do think Les Kiss is the favourite, but Dan McKellar could be there. Michael Checker is going to be a free agent. I can't see him, given his relationship with Phil Waugh, which I don't think is a good one, him becoming the next Wallabies coach, even though I think he could be the perfect candidate, given World Cup experience, knockout experience, big championships, etc. So if it's not going to be one of those guys, and I'm curious to hear what you think about Michael Checker, and even the others that you might have been coached by, a Dan McKellar, you would have spent a bit of time with him as well.
Yeah, and it's hard to know if a guy like Stephen Larkham, he's reached a semi-final on his own now without Jake and Laurie there a few times, and then you start wondering has he failed to win it because of his coaching experience or lack thereof, or has he kind of reached the potential with the group that he was given and the system that he's in? It's a really difficult one, and it's a little bit complex. My opinion on it, I don't know. I just like winning a competition somehow in terms of belief or whatever. I think if you're a young Wallaby and you go into a camp for the first time and you've got a coach there who's won competitions, you trust absolutely everything he says. When times get tough, which they inevitably do, you trust the coach's vision because he's been there and done that. So I think it shouldn't be discounted. And then using that theory, Check is easily the guy who has the most runs on the board, has succeeded, in provincial. I think he was the first coach ever to do the Heineken and Super. He's obviously taken Wallabies to the World Cup final, Argentina last year to the semi-final. So it's if you took the name out and you assessed it based on that criteria, you go, well, he's a clear standout, but I guess the history and whether there's any strained relationships in there. I think from a playing point of view, like any coach who sticks around for that long, is probably going to burn a few bridges with the players. It's because just the nature of it, high pressure sport. I think most of those players are gone now. So Check, if Check did come in, a feather in his cap would be, or an asset would be the fact that it's kind of a new group, and he's proven in the past to have quite a good impact on a new group like that. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, and I think the only ones there would be Alkin Allen, Alatoa, Taniela Tupou, people that have been in the system for quite a while, but they were young in their international journeys at that point in time. So they would have seen 3 coaches since then, and they've all kind of been rocky journeys. But I think that at the very least, I think you should be having a phone call with Michael Cheika, even if there's some bad blood between various people from boards from back in 2018, 19. The system was so different then. There was Israel Folau stuff going on in the background. There was the Western Force who had recently been removed. There were so many competing forces that I think that Cheika's own progression, I'm sure he probably thinks he's a better coach than he was 5-6 years ago when he was in Australia at the time, where he was such a passionate man, so patriotic, that it sometimes is probably hard to see beyond the own weeds he was walking. I think he would be. From what I'd heard a couple of years ago, yeah, absolutely. The opportunity to coach at a home World Cup, I don't think too many people would say no to it. And that's why I think, even though Dan McKellar today on a Monday at the presser at just past noon says, look, I don't want to be distracted by it, he's mentioned in the past the idea of coaching at a World Cup, at a home World Cup, would be the absolute pinnacle. So I think you got to take everything with a bit of a grain of salt from what people might say. Looking abroad, there's already Ronan O'Gara's come out and said, yep, keen. It would be great to coach a team like that. You'd have to be having a conversation with him. Across the ditch, though, Vern Cotter. Vern Cotter spent a couple of years with Joe Schmidt at Clermont, and they actually won a title there together. They'd reached a couple of finals, and they eventually won one before Joe Schmidt went to Ireland to Leinster and then kicked on. I reckon Vern Cotter's going to be right towards the top there. What he managed to do, and whether or not he'd be interested, I'm not sure. But he's a guy that's got a fair bit of gravitas about him. He's coached Six Nations, coached Scotland, probably should have knocked off you guys in the 2015 quarterfinal miraculously, even though it was a tough one. What do you think about Stern Vern?
I didn't think about that until you just mentioned. I guess all the mail I was hearing or whatever was, and I'm sure you heard as well, was Leon McDonald with Joe kind of sitting in the background. You mention Vern, you start going, that makes a bit of sense. It's in the same way that Joe made sense for us. Well, not made sense, we just got us excited. That would make us a bit excited as well. If you're talking about ticking those boxes, you start going, yep, he's coached internationally and well. He's for him to do what he did at the Blues is no mean feat. Like that's very similar to what Michael Cheika did with the Waratahs. You had the powerhouse of the nation who just couldn't win a comp for so long. So what he's done there, the way he did it, he brought that kind of test match style to it. It'd definitely be worth chatting to him. I think Ronan O'Gara is very obviously quite a well-credentialed coach, but that's too much of a Hail Mary, I think. If he had coached international rugby, then maybe. But the fact that he's kind of, he's clearly very, very, good at what he does. But do you give him the reins in a home World Cup? I don't know.
It's a big call. But he has won back-to-back European Champions Cups, I think 21-22. So he clearly has pedigree, and obviously 120-odd caps for Ireland.
Yeah, it works there in the sense that I think he speaks fluent French and he gets all that, so he gets that cultural thing. Will that have the same impact here? Don't know. An interesting one will be when they time the announcement of this, because at the moment, as it stands, Les Kiss, Stephen Larkham, Dan McKellar, and Cronny haven't won a super title. And then if someone wins a super title this year, like how they already made the announcement beforehand, I dare say because of that timeline, they're going to have to make something a bit sooner and effectively would rule those three out.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, and it's something I was having some conversations not long ago, and even though I think a month or two ago it would have been ideal to work out who your head coach was, so December or at the very latest early Jan, it's now early Feb. We're on the eve of the Super Rugby competition starting. So many of the contract negotiations are so deep that I think that they will be with players, that players will make a decision about what they want to do over the next week or two. They can't afford to let it drag out until the middle of the year. It just doesn't happen. And it doesn't even happen really for another month or two. It's right now you're in the pointy end as a player as to whether or not you're going to make the decision to re-sign in Australia through to the World Cup or go. I don't think that they're going to come out with a decision in the next 2 weeks about who the next head coach is. Could be wrong, but if they don't, why don't they just make the announcement in July? Straight after Super Rugby, work out who's actually can get one of these super sides, underachieving super sides, and get them to a final. Like, Ewan McKenzie came in August, and I know that the times changed since 2013, 12 years ago, but what do you think? Like, can you delay this a fair bit further now? They're not even going to be coaching until October.
Yeah, I think what are the odds that an Aussie team's going to win the comp this year? It's, you're probably looking not massive, we haven't done our predictions yet, but, so then you start going, all right, we probably need to ensure something a bit earlier, because if they're going to wait that long, from my side of things, looking at it, I'd say that's pretty poor management, not looking too far ahead. I think they would need to make a call in some way. It'd be interesting how Michael Cheika would be viewed from the public, because I think that's relevant as well. I'm probably less concerned about what the fans, what the board and his personal relationship with Phil Waugh is, even though that's relevant. It would be interesting to see how it'd be viewed in the fans if they would say that not enough water has gone under that bridge yet for them to jump back on board, or maybe they'll love getting behind a charismatic leader like himself, or, which has been the case lately, is that we're making a few sensible decisions, and maybe they go with someone like Vern Cotter, who is a little bit less high risk in terms of like quite a few things, but does he have the capability to get people behind him in a home World Cup? A guy like Czech would.
It's a really fascinating conversation right now, and it's heightened because whoever is announced as the next Wallabies coach will take them through to the World Cup. So we knew and we thought Joe Schmidt, there's a strong chance that he bows out at the Lions kind of period, and he has. I know we've been throwing up different options and speaking about candidates, and I think every single one of them actually has some pros about them, don't they? And even Les Kitt's 20 years of coaching experience, he's been with Ireland for a handful of years, including under Joe Schmidt for the 2015 World Cup. They didn't progress past the quarters at that point in time. They still have an Ireland, but you can make an argument for every single one of these coaches, which I think is a fascinating one. And Queensland, he's contracted there for another year, so through to the end of 26. Is that relevant? I don't think the QRU would be wanting to look for a new head coach, because they've found some stability and the playing group is enjoying what they're doing at the moment under him, only being in his second season. So it's a fascinating one. If I can pin you on who would you be your preferred candidate at this point in time, who would you say? Or if there was two people that you'd say, right?
Vern. I'd say Vern, and then I'd say Czech. Just international experience. They've won tournaments. Big thing for me, I was just thinking now, is like, if you name Les, Dan, and like obviously personal things go aside, I played under Dan, absolutely loved it. Played under Stephen, loved it. But if you're from another country and you hear that the Wallabies have signed Les Kiss or Dan or Stephen, and I know that's not a litmus test, but if they sign Czech, you go, whew. And if they sign Vern, you go, might need to look out here. And I know we're in the weeds, and we see it, and we see a little bit of improvement in the Reds. We're like, let's go and all that. But I just think it's a different league now, and I think you need someone who can win the World Cup. In my preference would be to go with something a bit more logical in terms of international experience, and Czech and Vern have that.
I tend to agree with you, and I think the other thing that would do would be allow for stability to grow at a Super Rugby level. Allow these guys to continue their development without having to separate the next kind of couple of coaching teams. Because if a McKellar goes in, he's grabbing, the Dan Palmers of the world. He's probably looking at a Peter Hewitt from overseas, maybe it doesn't disrupt as much as if Velez Kiss goes and he takes 2 or 3 guys from the Reds with him, and then the Reds are left scrambling about who their next options are as well. So, yeah, it's a really fascinating one. We'll hopefully be hearing more in the coming weeks. I'm sure we will. And it's an interesting, just a week out from Super Rugby starting, all the attention being on the Wallabies at the moment.
Probably worth mentioning though as well is like their ability to have a support team around them. And so Vern Cotter, say, is your head coach. I don't think Dan, Bernie, these guys would have, or even Lordy would have an issue working for him. If Czech's there, maybe that, I don't know if that bad blood between certain provincial coaches would necessarily be gone. And so I don't know if they would have that working relationship that you would need, because my sense is that home World Cup, we got to get our best coaches coaching the Wallabies, and that probably will look like, Stephen stepping up a bit, and maybe not as head coach, but in some way, and same as Les and Dan. So their working relationship with the head coach, if it is someone else who we tend to think it should be, is quite relevant, and I'm not sure if that plays in Czech's favour.
Interesting, and maybe a last sign-off point there is that Daniel Halangahu is a really impressive rising coach for the Blues. He is the assistant at the moment, not just assistant under previously Leon McDonald, but Vern Cotter. So I know he's enjoying life in Auckland, but I tell you what, he's got a great relationship with Phil Waugh, and if there was a time to bring him back, and an assistant coach for the Wallabies at a World Cup would be a pretty handy one. Hey, let's turn our attention to Super Rugby then. And geez, it's been a sorry demise, and we spoke about the Rebels last year. No one wanted to see them go, but you've got to admit, in the short term, the squads look a hell of a lot stronger than what we've been talking about in the past couple of years.
Oh yeah, looking at I don't know if it was the credit to whoever designed the Waratahs jersey. They just looked more intimidating. And seeing a guy like Rob Leota, and Kells, and like you just start going, whew, that's it. And this is the team who came last year, and then obviously Taniela, and and Isaac as well. Like you've got some proper stardust starting to from Super Rugby level anyway, starting to show up there, and it's definitely strengthened the team, which is great.
That would have taken you a bit to say that, Ben, starting with the Waratahs and Stardust, having spent so long both at Melbourne and the Brumbies.
Yeah, and I was a Queenslander beforehand. I still remember going down to under 16s, and we got all these stories about how New South Wales dogged us in the war or whatever. So no, it does. It takes a little bit, but I'm a new man, mate. New 2025, new man, new me. But no, honestly, it does. And particular, the Waratahs and the Reds are the ones who benefit heavily. I think the most. The Brumbies and the Force probably. Not as much so, but it's exciting that we've got some teams and some depth now that, late in the year, the Reds aren't going to just limp over the line like they did last year because they had so many injuries and guys had played so many minutes. You start having some good benches that can come on, and that's good for us.
Okay, before we get to actual predictions about how sides go, what do you think the best 3 signings are in 2025? So the best additions from an Australian perspective, and there's been truckloads of them. You look at the Reds and the locks that they've brought in, the Tars, and it's right across the side from the Kells, the Swalis, the Tupos. Even the Proctors have popped up at the Western Force, and Addo Molly's actually finally fit. What are you most impressed about? Who are you most excited about looking at?
Probably not the answer you want, but McKellar. I think he'll come back with a point to prove. I think he'll add some proper structure and some cultural things to the Waratahs that maybe hasn't been seen since Czech was there. So I think that'll be really exciting. Obviously, Suali'i is a big one for a few reasons. I think he excites not just Aussies, he excites Kiwis to watch. So I think that's such an obvious one. But I like the look of David Feluali at the Brumbies. I think that's a good little underrated signing. I think, especially with losing a couple players in Canberra. Yeah, I just like I like the fact that there's three of them. You know, that there's a few at each place, and I think that for me, like the collective kind of influence that'll bring on teams is will be good, and it'll just lift the standard a little bit.
Yeah, it certainly will. Okay, let's get into a few predictions. So the Waratahs are starting against the Highlanders. The Reds are going to have the first week off a bye, completing their 2-week tour of the Northern Hemisphere. They were way too good for a pretty poor Bristol side that had no one there that usually rolls out for the Bears. But then they also were too good for Ulster on the weekend, and that was a good win because it's not easy winning in the north of Ireland. Who do you think, in terms of an Australian perspective, is going to the semi-finals? Who, like, if you're making up the six, and of course it's no longer an 8-team final system, 6 teams qualifying. Who can you see making the finals there?
I'm going to say. I want the Brumbies to, obviously. I'm a bit concerned about the set piece. The particular scrum last year was quite concerning. I'm hoping that, you know, Alan and those guys can kind of pick it up a little bit. I think the Waratahs, I really think Dan will, I don't know. I just think Dan will get something out of them. I think they've got a good squad. I think they'll get in the top 6. I think the Reds, will come close as well. So I'd say I'm going to say Waratahs and Reds. I'm going to say Brumbies might just miss out this year.
Might miss out. Okay. So does that mean?
Yeah, I know. I hate saying that. I live in Canberra. I'm an ex-Brumby, you know, but I don't know. I just think, I just feel like maybe that if they didn't strike in the last couple of years, they might have missed the boat with a lot of their players. Maybe getting a little bit on, and yeah, that's probably my feel.
Well, the good thing about them from their set piece point of view is I still have them in the top 6. I think they'll scrape in there, but you think about an Alan Alaso, I think he improved as the year went on, and that's probably because he managed to get more strength and trust in his Achilles. He obviously came back through halfway through the Super Rugby season last year. Blake Shop, he got injured 3 times throughout the season last year. So if they manage to keep those guys fit and on the park, I still think that they can do some damage there. Like, there's too much potency in that back line. You know, a bit of a Wallabies axis there with a Lolaseo, Ikitau and a Tom Wright. I agree, David Fellowes. I think he dislocated his finger on the weekend in the last trial against the Force, but
it's got 9 others, mate. You'll be right.
Yeah, there's a few centres there and a few backs to kind of step up. So I agree. I think the Reds will be good, and I think the Waratahs, I agree. McKellar's a great shout, and what he's brought, everyone that you hear and you speak to at the moment, it's all about how tough he is. He's fair but tough, and that he demands standards, and that's been missing for quite a while. So it's the first time that I've seen a coach be so disciplinary. Like, you can hear him barking orders, and we haven't been hearing anyone bark orders at the Waratahs since Checker left in 2015.
Yeah, and look, that's ultimately, from what I'm hearing, is maybe didn't work in his favour at Leicester, was the fact that he kind of was very level with everyone. It didn't matter what you'd done in the past. You know, and he didn't play politics. He kind of just called a spade, and if things weren't working, they weren't working, and he went a bit hard at that. And I think some of the experienced players might have, had a little bit to do with it, which, you know, Leicester has a bit of a history of that. But, you know, what he's learnt from that experience, I think it's different over here. I think, like, it is a younger squad. He can genuinely be him. And I think he's probably, you know, suitable for what that group needs at the moment, which is a strong leader. You know, they've got a lot of names, but you know, you don't want to get guys who think they're too big for their boots, because you got a disciplinarian in charge.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say there, and the other factor with the English experience, they're long seasons, right? It's not like a sprint, like in Super Rugby, where it's done and dusted in 5 months. There, it's an 8-month grind, and you're kind of managing things all the time because the autumn internationals into the Six Nations, and your top tier players are coming back, and they're probably banged up, and they probably want to have a week or two of break as well.
Yeah, from what I'm hearing, he went hard as he does, Dan. But the season's longer; it's a different beast, and that it didn't resonate well with a lot of guys there. It is different to manage the seasons there. As you say, you have internationals. You have access to them at the start, then you don't for a little while. You have the weather, you have good conditions at the start of the year, then you have really good conditions at the end, and you've got this middle period where it's a grind. It's hard to come into work every day when it's cold and dark. And I just think maybe he would have learnt a lot from that, I think. And but that aside, I don't think that's hurt him in the Waratahs thing, because he knows they're set up here, and I think he'll be good for the Tars.
Yeah, I think they're actually craving that as well. I think they've known that they've underachieved. Like they'll last year, obviously. So things have to turn around. They probably need someone cracking the whip. Artie Sevilla, what can he do for Moana Pacifica? Can he? It's a great signing for them, and I think just overall competition at large. I think it's exactly what it needs to have one of the absolute best players in the world go to a team like Moana Pacifica.
Yeah, I think it's great. He's really respect a guy like him who's quite vocal about like his Samoan heritage, and he's very and then for him to actually go to Moana, which it's a risk because rugby being a team game, it's a bit different than say LeBron going to the Lakers or whatever, when they can have such an influence. I think he'll have an influence. I don't think it will be as much as we hope. I think the influence will very much be seen maybe in future years when people actually look at Moana and want to play for Moana because Artie did. And so I think I don't see it translating on the field straight away this year, but I think his impact on the group, on the competition, is massive. And I think that probably shouldn't be understated.
Good point. All right. It all starts this weekend, Friday night, Crusaders and Hurricanes. I don't think anyone would have seen the Crusaders last year struggling, missing out on finals. Like, it's extraordinary how their year panned out with Rob Penny. But their big guns are back, aren't they, this year? Your Cody Taylors, your Will Jordans, your Ethan Blackadders, Scott Barretts. They seem like they're in a much better spot. And, of course, James O'Connor, whether or not he'll make the 23 remains to be seen. But Crusaders, will they come back into the finals contention?
God, I don't know. Is Rob Penny still coach?
Yeah.
He is, yeah, okay. I don't know. I have no idea. I haven't really thought about it since, like, you naturally look at the draw and you go, yep, they'll win, they'll go there, then you actually, use a bit of context. I think any team that's got those players that you just mentioned, how do they miss out? How would they miss out? Like, it just doesn't seem kind of logical. But I don't know. I genuinely think we'll get 2, maybe 3 in the top 6 this year, probably 2 in the top 6, and then for the Crusaders to push out the Chiefs, the Blues, and the Hurricanes, I think that'll be quite tough as well. So I think the Crusaders could just miss out, I reckon, again.
Okay. Well, that's a heck of a prediction if they were to do that. And I can tell you Rob Penny wouldn't be lasting too much longer if they miss out again.
No, I agree.
Hurricanes without Geordie Barrett this year, that makes it harder, but they've got some serious firepower. Cam Roygaard, of course, having missed a lot of last year, he'll be back. Firing from Ruben Love was across the ditch the other day as well. Love watching him play, no pun intended whatsoever. I think it'll be curious. The Tars will start, they'll get better throughout the year. They have to bank a couple of these early wins, though, because they play, I think it's 4 of the opening 5 rounds there at home, and some of their opposition, like they've got the Drua in the 3rd week and then the Force in the 4th week, like they need to get on a bit of a winning run before they go up to play Queensland at Suncorp Stadium. So it's a big opening month for the Tars just to find momentum. And where Swaley plays will be fascinating in itself. Like where would you like to see him play? And we didn't even get your thoughts about him and what he managed to achieve on the end of the spring tour.
Yeah, I would. Well, it's just the natural, I guess, thing is 15 because of his ability in the air. and his just athleticism, kind of ability to pop up. But it was pretty cool to see him play 13 and play it pretty well, which is not easy. I think, obviously having Lenny there defending at 13 helps him a little bit. But at the same time, this is his first game of rugby on a Northern Hemisphere tour. Put him at 13. Defensively, it's quite tough. Attack, you're not going to see a whole lot of them compared to 15. If I'm Dan, I'm getting him at 15. I'm having him as my second playmaker, and I'm getting him as many touches as I can. Very much just floating. So I'd be playing him at 15 for sure. It's exciting. It's really exciting. Speaking to a few of the guys who had a bit to do with him on tour, he's just the ultimate professional. Really humble guy, really good, good dude, a good guy to kind of put your money on, literally. So it's good to see. It's good to see, and only wish him well.
Yeah, you played obviously with Izzy for a long while. Did you he played a lot and mainly at fullback, but there was a time when Czech and Daryl Gibson toyed with him at outside centre. I don't know if it was a complete failure, but he did seem to understand the game a lot more at fullback, and I feel like there's more strengths to a Swale at fullback than there are at 13. I think at times outside centres can go out of the game a little bit if I don't think you can have as much influence in the game if you're at outside centre at times.
Yeah, and I think, at a time when Tavita Kurandrani was playing really, really well, Izzy, could play 15 and stay at 15. And then when Tev got injured a few times, it was kind of, if only you could pick Israel at 13 and 15. So I think there's very much, it was just, and you'd have ways about getting them involved more if you wanted them on the front line and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure they'll do that with Suwali as well. So, look, I'd say 15, lock it in. Give a guy like Jorgensen time on the wing to develop, and learn and grow. Don't put too much on his shoulders too early.
Well, he looks very good. If anyone that saw him against the Brumbies in a trial a couple of weeks ago, I think the Drua will obviously be tough at home. Their big kind of concerns over the years and struggles have just been on the road, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. The Force, so the Brumbies, it's a tough opening month for them, and good luck. They're coming up against the Drua away this weekend, but they've got the Chiefs and the Blues in the opening month as well. So, and they're both across the ditch. So that's a really tough opening month for them, and I think it's made even harder with Rob Valentini with a hamstring injury and out for a little while. So that's not ideal.
No, it's not. I spoke to a guy at the cafe actually a couple of days ago. He came in talking about it. And, it's one of those ones where he's been such an amazing player for Australian rugby. Is it the worst thing that he misses, a bit of time in the Lions here? Probably not. I think he deserves that. And to be fair, I think the Brumbies back rows usually pretty good. Have a history of producing very, very good back rowers and having depth at that position. So, but that being said, his ability to get front foot ball first phase, often used either at the back of a line out sweeping off a little peel play or used in a 5-6 man. And he does it so well. So it'll be interesting how they kind of navigate around that now.
I'll tell you what, your old teammate David Pocock has been popping up watching some of these trials as well. And we saw him with the board brim hat the other day. And I reckon he could still cut it out there in Super Rugby. He's about as jacked as they come, the Senator Pocock.
He's not doing any past players any favours. We all blow out and he gets more ripped and you go, oh, geez, thanks, mate. So as if we needed that, Senator.
The Blues and Chiefs is an awesome way to kick off the weekend. I think that's the match of the round. I think you have to say it. Like Friday night will be good fun with the Crusaders and Hurricanes, but Blues Chiefs, repeat of last year's final, that'll be a cracker. And I think what an opportunity for Vern Cotter's men to flex their muscles and just welcome back Beauden Barrett, by the way. He didn't even play last year, which is a scary proposition given that he'll be there in 2025.
Yeah, and what a guy to bring back, and a guy who maybe we thought was on, losing a bit, and it started last year, and then he comes back. He's an amazing player. Definitely will go down as one of the greats. They're going to be hard to beat, the Blues, I think, this year. I reckon the Canes might get to them in the final potentially. I thought the Canes were. I wonder if the Canes, it was one of those, you got to lose one to win one scenario. Like I wonder if they'll learn a lot from that and come back. And that semi-final, they clearly just gassed the Chiefs and for the final because it was such an intense game. But I think it'll be, I think Blues Canes will probably be the two that will potentially fight for it in the end.
Yeah, you'd be a crazy person to be betting against that. The last one, the Force and Moana. Force, from what I've heard, have already lost Harry Hooper for the season, an ACL, so that's stretching their depth already, particularly with Harry Johnson-Holmes hurting. We're not quite sure the severity of the injury, but he
trial, didn't he?
He forced out just before the trial got underway in the warm-up there. So to lose two of your contracted props, never a good thing, particularly when your type five's been your issue over the last few years. So fingers crossed for Harry Hooper and Harry Johnson-Holmes that they can, they've been injury-riddled for so long, and hopefully that luck can turn and they can get some over the coming months. And I feel pretty sorry for those guys because they've spent way too long on the sidelines. But it's probably a must-win game for the Force if they're going to be serious about trying to make a challenge whatsoever. They've got to get off to a good start, and Moana is not the worst team to welcome first up. Good little wrap there on the teams. Excited about the season, the pod season ahead, because we'll get so many guests on once again. Just a quite odd competition called Six Nations up north as well. Just a note on that: have you been watching? Are you impressed? Like, the Lions, is that Andy Farrell rubbing his hands together at the moment, or has he got some serious questions and headaches, selection headaches?
Yeah, I was about to say good headaches when you see the level that they're playing at the moment, and as much as it pains me to admit, England, they've been the moral victors many times. The moral victory, they had the moral victory quite a few times, unfortunately, but they're starting to get a few wins as well. So there's so much depth there. Obviously, headed up by Ireland, and it's exciting. It's such a good competition. I do get sick of them saying rugby's greatest competition, but it probably is. But yeah, I think Ireland clearly the front runners now, particularly with France. I thought the French, maybe they could turn them over if they were playing in Paris, but the fact that they're going to be playing in Ireland, I think they're going to go through undefeated again.
Unbelievable results. I can't believe France. It kind of reminded me of a Wallabies side at times. Just a lot of opportunities, didn't take them. And, the French will be kicking themselves because they probably should have 7-0 at halftime against the English and having bombed 3 tries. That was there on a plate, and they allowed England to stay in the fight, and they, a great victory for them. And Twickenham was clearly pumping. Scotland, the nearly men of the Six Nations, they were just Ireland way too good for them over the night. Territory possession, and they dominated the first 20 minutes, and then unfortunately, they lost Finn Russell. But I think by then the game was already slipped from their fingers. But last one, Prendergast, the 10. What are your thoughts about him? Because there's been so much of a discussion about the 10s up there, particularly in Ireland. Prendergast's been backed in, and he's been backed in now for a few months, having lined up against the Aussies at 10 as well.
Looks like a cricketer. Isn't he tiny? He's so slender, but he's brave. He plays like Johnny, really. Like I was watching, I watched like their highlights just before the pod, rewatched the highlights, and just seeing him doing those loop plays, that kind of stuff, and you're like, it goes to show that they don't rely on individual brilliance. They have a set system that people come in, you got to play this way, and it works. And they very much don't rely on that kind of X factor to do. And maybe that shoots himself in the foot because they can't get out of the quarterfinals as well. But for a young fella coming into a team that's got a system that's proven and that's doing well, it's such an easier kind of transition than say Carter Gordon going to the World Cup or Donaldson going to the World Cup with nothing beneath them. So you get to see them perform well behind a good team, and it makes things a bit easier, I think.
We're always fascinated about the 10s and the midfield, the backs, they're the ones that,
win the games, man.
Don't always win your games, but they're the ones that get all the headlines, I'll tell you that. But, the fact that a Gary Ringrose comes off the bench for Ireland on the weekend just shows and tells you about the depth up there. Like an amazing kind of resources. Fair play to Robbie Henshaw to come in and have the game he did. A shout out to the oldies, though. If anyone saw Jamie George on the weekend, was just faultless when he came on, hit his targets. He's gone through a lot, including losing the captaincy for England recently. So it's a nod to the
Elliot Daly, even if you call him old now. Yeah, wasn't that great?
He's come on 5 minutes to go and perfect line, double pump from Finn Smith there, who looks a test player. He looks like an organiser. And it just, Marcus Smith's reminding me of Damien McKenzie more by the day at the moment. And do those people always succeed at the test level? It's flaky performances often, and there's moments of brilliance there. But, Finn Smith's got to wear the 10 jersey now for a little while, you'd think so.
Yeah, he's got a bit of George Ford about him, Finn Smith, like just that kind of triple threat. In fairness to Marcus Smith, he was exceptional down in New Zealand. When was it, last year? And then up, like he was, I
thought he was the best 10 last year.
Yeah, I think I agree with it. I think he's got some amazing pluses. It's just the fact that he's not great in the air for a start, so they target him. You see good teams target him when he goes to the wing. And he's not a great defender. And every now and then he has the wobbles with his kick, but I thought he was exceptional last year. So I'd as much as I'd love to get behind Finn Smith and say he's the next guy, I still think there's room to move for Marcus Smith to nail that 10 jersey as well, because I still think he can get better, and I think he will. But I think he's a proper good talent that we might only realise how good he was once he's left, and you go, oh, geez, if only we had that. I don't know. I would persist with him to some extent. But yeah, Finn Smith looks class as well.
I tell you what, at least it's not our issue to be discussing too much about. Hey, good first pod. Good to kind of dust off the cobwebs there. It's been a little while, and I'm not sure how tongue-tied we got there, but I think we'll be even better for the run when we're breaking it all down in a week's time. Off the back of the first week of Super Rugby. Awesome to have you back and joining us again throughout the season. None better than Matt Tamur. I'm Christy Doran. Thanks for listening to the first edition in 2025 of the Roar Rugby Podcast.